The emergency klaxon screamed through the underground bunker as Admiral Harrison Kane slammed his fist against the holographic display. Red warning lights bathed the command center in an ominous glow, while tactical officers scrambled around their stations like ants whose hill had been kicked. "Sir, the Zephyrian fleet has broken through our outer defenses," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. "They're heading straight for Earth's orbital platforms. ETA, 14 hours. Kane's weathered face remained stone-cold as he studied the three-dimensional battlefield floating before him. 67 massive alien warships, each the size of a city block, were carving through space like knives through butter. Their weapons had already reduced Luna Base to radioactive debris, and now they set their sights on humanity's homeworld. "What about the Mars defense grid?" Kane asked, though he already knew the answer from the grim expressions around him. "Offline, sir. The Zephyrians hit it with some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon we've never seen before. Our entire fleet is scattered across 3 systems, and there's no way to recall them in time." The room fell silent except for the steady hum of computers and the distant rumble of defensive preparations above ground. Kane had spent 43 years in the United Earth Defense Force, rising through the ranks by making impossible decisions and somehow finding ways to win unwinnable battles. But this was different. The Zephyrians weren't just another hostile alien race. They were systematic, ruthless, and possessed technology that made humanity's most advanced weapons look like stone tools. Their ships could phase through solid matter. Their energy weapons could punch holes through mountains, and their warriors regenerated from wounds that would kill any human instantly. "Options?" Kane asked his senior staff. "We could evacuate the civilian population to the underground cities," suggested Colonel Morrison, the base's chief strategist. "Maybe hold out long enough for the fleet to return." "That's not an option, that's surrender with extra steps," Kane replied sharply. "The Zephyrians don't take prisoners. You've seen the reports from Kepler Colony." Everyone in the room had seen those reports. The images were burned into their minds. Entire cities reduced to glass. Populations simply vanishing without a trace, as if they had never existed at all. The Zephyrians didn't conquer worlds. They sterilized them. "Sir," Chen spoke up again, "there is one possibility. The Hail Mary Protocol." Kane's expression darkened. The Hail Mary Protocol was theoretical at best, suicidal at worst. It involved using Earth's orbital defense platforms as massive kinetic weapons, essentially turning them into guided meteors that would crash into the planet's surface to take out the Zephyrian landing forces. The collateral damage would be catastrophic, potentially killing millions of innocent people. "Absolutely not," Kane said firmly. "I won't destroy Earth to save it." "Then what do you suggest, Admiral?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. "Because I'm looking at these tactical readouts, and I don't see a single scenario where we come out of this alive." Kane stared at the holographic display, watching the red dots of the Zephyrian fleet creep closer to Earth's position. His mind raced through every military strategy he had ever learned, every battle he had ever fought, every miracle he had ever witnessed. Nothing came to mind. For the first time in his career, Admiral Harrison Kane was completely out of options. "Mission unfeasible," he muttered under his breath, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. That's when the proximity alarm started blaring. "Sir, we have an unidentified aircraft approaching the base," reported Sergeant Williams from the communication station. "It's not responding to our hails, and it's flying through restricted airspace." "What kind of aircraft?" Kane asked, grateful for any distraction from the impossible situation before him. "It appears to be an A-10 Thunderbolt, sir. Ancient design, probably from the early 21st century. Kane frowned. A-10s had been retired from active service over 200 years ago, replaced by faster, more advanced fighters. What was one doing flying around during humanity's darkest hour? "Is it armed?" Morrison asked. "Negative, sir. In fact, our scanners are picking up some unusual modifications. The aircraft appears to be equipped with technology we don't recognize." The tactical display shifted to show the approaching aircraft. It was definitely an A-10, but something about it seemed different. The hull gleamed with an almost metallic sheen that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Strange symbols were etched along its wings, glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with some unknown energy source. "Sir, the pilot is requesting permission to land," Williams reported. "She says she has information that could help us with our current situation." Kane exchanged glances with his staff. How could anyone possibly know about their situation? The Zephyrian invasion was classified at the highest levels, known only to a handful of military personnel and government officials. Did she identify herself? Kane asked. Negative, sir. She just said to tell you that the impossible becomes possible when you stop thinking like everyone else. Those words hit Kane like a physical blow. They were almost identical to something his old mentor, General Patricia Stone, used to say during the academy. But Stone had died 15 years ago in the Battle of Titan. It had to be a coincidence. Sir, what are your orders? Chen asked. Kane studied the approaching aircraft on the display. Every instinct told him to turn it away, to focus on the real threat bearing down on Earth. But something else, some deeper intuition built from decades of military experience, whispered that this strange visitor might be exactly what they needed. Clear Landing Bay 7, Kane ordered, and have a security team standing by. If this pilot has information that could help us, I want to hear it. If she's some kind of threat, we'll deal with her accordingly. Yes, sir. As the modified A-10 approached the base, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The Zephyrian fleet continued its relentless advance toward Earth, but for the first time in hours, he felt a tiny spark of something he had almost forgotten: hope. The aircraft touched down with surprising grace, its landing gear barely making a sound against the reinforced deck plating. Steam hissed from various ports along its hull as the engines powered down, and the strange blue symbols along its wings gradually faded to darkness. Kane watched through the observation window as the cockpit opened and a figure in a flight suit began to climb out. Even from this distance, he could tell something was unusual about the pilot's movements. They were too fluid, too precise, as if every motion had been calculated for maximum efficiency. Admiral, Chen said quietly. I'm reading some very strange energy signatures from that aircraft. Whatever technology it's equipped with, it's not human. Kane nodded grimly. First an impossible alien invasion, and now a mysterious pilot with unknown technology appearing at their moment of greatest need. Either this was the answer to their prayers, or things were about to get a whole lot worse. The security team's weapons remained trained on the mysterious pilot as she walked through the airlock, but Admiral Kane noticed they seemed uncertain about their target. The woman moved with an almost supernatural confidence, as if the dozen plasma rifles pointed at her were nothing more than decorative ornaments. She was tall, probably around 6 feet, with short auburn hair that seemed to catch and hold light in unusual ways. Her flight suit was unlike anything Kane had ever seen, made from a material that appeared to shift between solid black and deep space blue depending on the angle. Most striking of all were her eyes, which seemed to hold depths that suggested she had seen far more than any human should in a single lifetime. Admiral Kane, she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Kane couldn't quite place. I'm Captain Elena Vasquez. Thank you for allowing me to land. Captain Vasquez, Kane replied carefully. According to our records, no one by that name has clearance to access this facility. In fact, no one by that name exists in our military database at all. Elena smiled, and Kane felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't an unfriendly expression, but there was something ancient and knowing about it that made him deeply uncomfortable. That's because I'm not from your military, Admiral. I'm from a different one entirely. One that exists about 300 years in your future. The security team tensed, fingers moving closer to triggers, but Kane held up a hand to stop them. He had heard a lot of impossible things in his career, but something about this woman made him want to listen before making any rash decisions. Time travel, Kane said flatly. You're claiming to be from the future. Not claiming, Admiral, stating, and before you ask how that's possible, let me save us both some time. The technology exists. It's incredibly dangerous, and it's only used in situations where the very survival of humanity is at stake. Lieutenant Commander Chen stepped forward, her scanner in hand. Sir, I'm reading energy signatures from her equipment that are off the charts. Whatever technology she's using, it's centuries beyond anything we have. Elena nodded approvingly at Chen. Smart officer. You're Sarah Chen. Graduated top of your class from the academy, specialized in xenobiology and tactical analysis. In my timeline, you become one of the most decorated admirals in human history. Chen's face went pale. The information was accurate, but more than that, Elena had spoken about Chen's future career as if it were already established fact. What do you want? Kane asked bluntly. To prevent the complete extinction of the human race, Elena replied without hesitation. In my timeline, this battle against the Zephyrians was the beginning of the end. You fought bravely, but you lost. Earth fell, and within 50 years, every human colony in the galaxy had been wiped out. The command center fell silent, except for the steady hum of computers and the distant alarms still warning of the approaching alien fleet. Kane studied Elena's face, searching for any sign of deception, but found only grim determination. If you're really from the future, Morrison spoke up, then you know how this battle ends. What happened to us? Elena's expression grew darker. You made the right tactical decisions with the information you had. The problem was that you didn't understand what you were really fighting. The Zephyrians aren't just another aggressive alien species. They're something much worse. She moved to the holographic display, and Kane noticed that the security team had unconsciously lowered their weapons. Something about Elena's presence commanded respect, even from hardened soldiers who had been trained to trust no one. The Zephyrians are reality parasites, Elena continued, manipulating the hologram with movements that seem to bend the very laws of physics. They don't just conquer worlds. They consume the fundamental structure of spacetime itself. Every planet they sterilize becomes a dead zone where the normal laws of physics break down. That's impossible, Chen said. Matter and energy can't just disappear. You're thinking too small, Elena replied. The Zephyrians exist partially outside our dimensional framework. When they attack a world, they're not just destroying the physical matter. They're unraveling the quantum foundations that allow that matter to exist in the first place. Kane felt his world shifting beneath his feet. Everything they thought they knew about their enemy was wrong. If Elena was telling the truth, then humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to preserve the very concept of existence itself. How do we stop them? Kane asked. Elena's smile returned, but this time it carried a predatory edge that reminded Kane why humans had become the apex predators of Earth. By doing something they never expect. You see, the Zephyrians have fought thousands of species across the galaxy. They've developed strategies to counter every conventional military approach, but they've never fought humans before. What makes us special? Morrison asked skeptically. Because humans are the only species in the galaxy that consistently does the impossible, Elena replied. Every other race follows logical patterns, predictable strategies, sensible tactics. But humans do things like strap themselves to controlled explosions and fly to the moon just to prove they can. She gestured toward the tactical display showing the approaching alien fleet. The Zephyrians expect you to respond rationally to this threat. They expect you to fall back, regroup, maybe attempt some kind of negotiated surrender. They've seen it all before. What do you suggest instead? Kane asked. Elena walked over to the communications station and began inputting commands with movements too fast for the human eye to follow. We're going to do something so fundamentally insane that it breaks their entire tactical framework. We're going to attack them. Attack them? Chen exclaimed. Admiral, we have maybe a dozen functional fighters against 67 capital ships. It would be suicide. Exactly, Elena said, her fingers dancing across the controls with impossible precision. The Zephyrians have never encountered a species willing to commit tactical suicide to achieve strategic victory. Their entire military doctrine is based on the assumption that intelligent life values self-preservation above all else. Kane watched the tactical display update as Elena's modifications took effect. Somehow she was accessing military networks that should have been completely secure, pulling up classified information that should have been impossible for her to obtain. What are you doing to our systems? Kane demanded. Upgrading them, Elena replied casually. Your weapons and shields are about to get a significant boost from technology that won't be invented for another 3 centuries. But that's not the important part. What is the important part? Kane asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Elena turned to face him, and Kane saw something in her eyes that he recognized from his own mirror after particularly difficult battles. It was the look of someone who had seen hell and chosen to walk back into it anyway. The important part, Admiral, is that you're about to discover something the Zephyrians learned too late in my timeline. Humans don't just fight to win. When everything is on the line, when survival itself is at stake, humans fight to make sure that even if they lose, their enemies will remember them forever. The proximity alarm suddenly stopped blaring, replaced by a different tone that Kane had never heard before. Elena's modifications were complete, and every screen in the command center now displayed information that seemed to exist somewhere between science and magic. The Zephyrian fleet will be in weapons range in 6 hours, Elena announced. That gives us just enough time to turn your impossible mission into their worst nightmare. The transformation of the command center happened so gradually that Kane almost didn't notice it at first. Elena moved between workstations like a conductor directing an invisible orchestra, her hands dancing across controls that seemed to respond to her touch in ways they never had for their original operators. "Sergeant Williams," Elena called out, "bring up the deep space monitoring array. I need a complete scan of the Zephyrian fleet's energy signatures." Williams hesitated, looking to Kane for permission. The Admiral nodded, curious to see what Elena would discover that their own sensors had missed. The main display shifted to show detailed readouts of the approaching alien vessels. But instead of the solid red markers they had been tracking for hours, the ships now appeared as complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and pulse with their own internal rhythm. "My God," Chen whispered. "They're not completely in our dimension." "Exactly," Elena confirmed. "The Zephyrians exist in a state of quantum flux, partially phased into our reality and partially existing in what they call the void between. That's why your weapons have been so ineffective against them. You've been shooting at shadows." Kane studied the new sensor data with growing understanding. The alien ships weren't just technologically advanced. They were operating according to completely different physical laws. No wonder humanity's defenses had crumbled so quickly. "How do we fight something that's only half there?" Morrison asked. Elena's fingers flew across another console, and suddenly the tactical display lit up with new information. Weapon trajectories, shield frequencies, and energy patterns that had been invisible moments before, now blazed with brilliant clarity. "By becoming something they can't predict," Elena replied. "You see, the Zephyrians have one critical weakness. Their quantum phase technology requires absolute precision. Any significant disruption to their dimensional anchoring, and they get pulled fully into our reality." And then they become vulnerable, Kane realized. More than vulnerable, catastrophically exposed. When a Zephyrian ship is forced into full-dimensional sync, it loses about 90% of its defensive capabilities and most of its exotic weapons. Elena moved to the central command console and began inputting a series of commands that made Kane's head spin. Mathematical equations scrolled across the screen, interspersed with dimensional calculations that seemed to violate everything he thought he knew about physics. "What I'm doing," Elena explained as she worked, "is reprogramming your quantum resonance generators. Instead of using them to stabilize your own ship's systems, we're going to turn them into dimensional destabilizers." "We don't have quantum resonance generators," Chen pointed out. Elena smiled. "You do now, along with about 40 other pieces of technology that your science teams won't invent for another 2 centuries. The beauty of time travel is that it allows you to skip a few steps in the development process." The lights in the command center flickered as Elena's modifications took effect. Kane could feel something changing in the air itself, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones. Around him, his officers were staring at their instruments with expressions of wonder and confusion. "Admiral," Williams reported, "our entire sensor array just became about 1,000 times more sensitive. I'm reading energy patterns I didn't even know existed." "And our weapons?" Kane asked. "According to these readings, sir, our plasma cannons are now operating at efficiency levels that should be physically impossible. The power output has increased by a factor of 12. Elena stepped back from the console, wiping what looked like stardust from her hands. "The technology upgrades will help level the playing field, but they're not what's going to win this battle for you." "Then what is?" Kane demanded. "The human element," Elena replied. "You see, Admiral, in my timeline, humanity eventually developed technology that could match the Zephyrians ship for ship. But by then it was too late. The war had already been lost because we had forgotten the one thing that makes humans truly dangerous." She gestured toward the tactical display, where the enhanced sensors now showed the Zephyrian fleet in unprecedented detail. Kane could see the individual weapon emplacements, the energy conduits, even what appeared to be crew movements within the massive vessels. "What did we forget?" Chen asked. "That humans don't fight like any other species in the galaxy. Every other race the Zephyrians have encountered follows predictable patterns. They build defenses, they establish supply lines, they try to minimize casualties and preserve resources. Very logical. Very sensible. Very doomed. Elena activated a new display that showed historical battle footage. Kane watched in fascination as human forces throughout history threw themselves into impossible situations with reckless abandon. The charge of the Light Brigade, Thermopylae, the Battle of Britain, the defense of New Geneva. Humans, Elena continued, are the only species that specializes in glorious disasters. You take impossible odds and turn them into legendary victories through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. Kane began to understand what Elena was suggesting, and the implications made his blood run cold. You want us to attack them directly, not just attack them. I want you to do something so insanely aggressive that it short-circuits their entire tactical framework. The Zephyrians have conquered 1,000 worlds because they can predict how rational beings will respond to overwhelming force. Elena manipulated the tactical display to show attack vectors that made Kane's trained military mind recoil in horror. They were suicide runs, pure and simple, direct assaults against impossible odds with no hope of survival. This is madness, Morrison said. Yes, Elena agreed cheerfully. Beautiful, glorious, utterly human madness. And that's exactly why it's going to work. She activated another set of displays that showed probability calculations. The numbers were staggering. According to the computer models, Elena's proposed attack had less than a 2% chance of success and a 98% chance of total annihilation. Look closer at those numbers, Elena instructed. That 2%? That's the margin that doesn't exist in any other species' tactical database. That's the human factor, the tendency to succeed specifically because failure should be inevitable. Kane studied the battle plan with growing fascination. It was indeed madness, but there was a terrible logic to it. The Zephyrians would never expect humanity to throw everything they had into a frontal assault, with no backup plan and no hope of retreat. Even if this works, Chen said, most of our pilots won't survive. Most of your pilots are dead anyway if we don't try this, Elena replied bluntly. At least this way they die as heroes instead of victims. The command center fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what Elena was proposing. It wasn't just a military strategy. It was a fundamental choice about how humanity would face extinction. They could die quietly, following rational tactics that had no hope of success, or they could die as themselves, loud, defiant, and utterly refusing to go gentle into that good night. There's one more thing, Elena said quietly. The attack has to be led by someone the Zephyrians will never see coming. Kane looked around the room, mentally cataloging his available pilots and their capabilities. But Elena was already shaking her head. Not one of your people, Admiral. Me. You? Kane asked. In that antique A-10. Elena's smile turned predatory. Admiral, that antique is equipped with technology from 3 different timelines and powered by an engine that runs on crystallized impossibility. It's going to punch through their defenses like they're made of tissue paper. Kane stared at the mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere with a plan that violated every principle of sound military strategy. She was asking him to bet the survival of the human race on a tactic that was barely distinguishable from elaborate suicide. When do we begin? Kane asked. Elena's grin widened. We already have. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation that felt more like controlled chaos than military planning. Elena had transformed the underground base into something that resembled a scene from humanity's wildest science fiction dreams, complete with humming energy fields and displays that seemed to bend light around their edges. Kane watched his pilots receive briefings on weapon systems that shouldn't exist in flight, maneuvers that violated basic physics. The strangest part wasn't that the technology worked. It was how quickly his people adapted to it, as if humans were naturally designed to operate impossible machinery. Sir, Chen reported, all fighters are equipped with the dimensional stabilizers. According to these readings, our weapons should now be able to target the Zephyrians even while their phase shifted. Kane nodded, though part of his mind still refused to accept what was happening. 24 hours ago, humanity had been on the verge of extinction. Now they were preparing to launch an attack using technology that seemed more like magic than science. What about our losses? Morrison asked grimly. Elena looked up from a console where she had been fine-tuning weapon calibrations. Honestly, probably 60 to 70% casualties in the first wave, maybe 80% by the time we're done. The room fell silent. Those weren't just statistics. They were friends, colleagues, people with families and dreams and futures that would never happen. And if we don't attack? Kane asked, though he already knew the answer. 100% casualties, followed by the complete extinction of the human race. Elena replied without hesitation. At least this way, some of you survived to tell the story. Lieutenant Rodriguez, one of Kane's best pilots, spoke up from across the room. Captain Vasquez, I've been looking at your proposed attack pattern. It requires us to fly directly through their primary weapons array with no cover and no support. That's not a mission. It's assisted suicide. Elena smiled at Rodriguez with something that might have been approval. You're absolutely right, Lieutenant. It is assisted suicide. But here's the thing about humans that the Zephyrians don't understand. Sometimes you win precisely because you're willing to die. She activated the main display and showed Rodriguez the attack vector in 3 dimensions. The route did indeed lead straight through the heart of the alien formation, directly into the teeth of their most devastating weapons. The Zephyrians have studied every spacefaring race they've encountered, Elena explained. They know exactly how those species respond to overwhelming force. They retreat, they regroup, they look for tactical advantages and defensive positions. What they don't do is charge straight at the enemy with guns blazing and death songs on their lips. Kane studied the tactical display with growing fascination. Elena was right. It was insane. But there was something undeniably appealing about the sheer audacity of it. Instead of cowering behind their defenses waiting for the inevitable, they would meet their destruction head-on. How do we know this will work? Chen asked. Elena's expression grew distant, as if she were remembering something from a time that hadn't happened yet. Because I've seen what happens when humans stop being human. In my timeline, we became too careful, too strategic, too much like every other rational species in the galaxy, and we lost everything. She gestured toward the pilots gathered around the briefing area. These people? They're about to do something that will be remembered for the next 1,000 years. They're going to show the universe that humanity doesn't go quietly into extinction. Kane felt something stirring in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his academy days. It was the same sensation that had driven him to join the military in the first place, the desire to be part of something greater than himself, to stand against the darkness and refuse to yield. All pilots, listen up, Kane announced, his voice carrying across the hangar bay. In 30 minutes, we launch the most important mission in human history. We're not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. We're fighting for the right of humanity to exist in this universe. The pilots gathered closer, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and determination that Kane had seen countless times before. But this time felt different. This time they weren't just following orders. They were choosing to become legends. I know the odds, Kane continued. I know what we're asking of you. But I also know something the Zephyrians don't. I know that humans have never met impossible odds we couldn't somehow overcome through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. Rodriguez stepped forward. Sir, what about our families? Our loved ones. Elena answered before Kane could speak. Lieutenant, if we fail today, your families won't exist tomorrow. But if we succeed, they'll spend the rest of their lives telling stories about the day humanity saved itself by doing the impossible. The pilot nodded slowly, and Kane could see the moment when Rodriguez made his choice. It wasn't resignation. It was acceptance of something greater than fear. Sir, Sergeant Williams called out from the communications station. The Zephyrian fleet has entered our sensor range. They're moving into attack formation. Kane looked at the tactical display one last time. 67 massive alien warships, each one capable of reducing a moon to rubble, were bearing down on Earth with methodical precision. Against them, humanity could field 18 fighters and whatever impossible technology Elena had provided. Captain Vasquez, Kane said formally, you have command of the attack. Elena nodded and began walking toward the hangar bay where her modified A-10 waited. As she passed each pilot, she stopped to say something quietly, words that Kane couldn't hear but that seemed to transform each person she spoke to. What is she telling them? Chen asked. Kane listened carefully and caught fragments of Elena's conversations. She was telling each pilot something different, something personal and specific to them. To Rodriguez, she mentioned his daughter's graduation. To Chen, she spoke about discoveries yet to be made. To Morrison, she described victories that existed only in potential. She's telling them what they're fighting for, Kane realized. Not just humanity in general, but their own piece of it. Elena reached her aircraft and turned back to address the assembled pilots one final time. Listen carefully, because this is the most important thing I'll ever tell you. In about 20 minutes, you're going to do something that will echo through time itself. Every human who comes after you will carry a piece of your courage in their hearts. She climbed into her cockpit, and Kane could see the strange blue symbols along her aircraft's wings beginning to glow with increasing intensity. The Zephyrians think they know how this battle ends. Elena's voice came over the communications system. They think they've seen every possible human response to overwhelming force. They're about to learn that they've never seen humans at their most dangerous, when they have absolutely nothing left to lose. Kane felt the base's launch systems activating around him. The hangar bay doors opened to reveal the star-filled darkness of space, and beyond it, the approaching lights of the Zephyrian fleet. All pilots prepare for launch, Kane ordered. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for the idea that sometimes, against all logic and reason, good can triumph over evil through pure force of will. Elena's A-10 was the first to launch, accelerating into space with impossible speed and grace. Behind her, 18 human fighters followed, their engines burning bright against the cosmic darkness. Kane watched from the command center as humanity's last hope disappeared into the void, carrying with them the desperate prayers of an entire species. On the tactical display, the human formation looked pitifully small against the massive alien fleet. "Sir," Chen said quietly, "they're really going to do it. They're going to charge straight into those ships." Kane nodded, unable to speak. He had sent good people to their deaths before, but never like this. Never with such impossible odds and such terrible necessity. "Admiral," Williams reported, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the Zephyrian fleet. They're preparing to fire their primary weapons." Kane gripped the edge of his console and watched as the two forces closed the distance between them. In minutes, they would know whether Elena's impossible plan would save humanity or simply provide them with a more glorious form of extinction. "Whatever happens next," Kane said to his staff, "remember that we chose to meet our fate on our own terms." The first moment of contact between the human fighters and the Zephyrian fleet happened in complete silence, the vacuum of space swallowing the fury of weapons fire and explosions that should have been deafening. Kane watched through the enhanced sensors as Elena's A-10 led the charge directly into the heart of the alien formation. What happened next defied every principle of military tactics Kane had ever learned. Instead of the methodical destruction he expected, the Zephyrian ships seemed to hesitate. Their weapons fire, which should have vaporized the human fighters instantly, was somehow missing targets that were flying in perfectly straight lines with no evasive maneuvers whatsoever. "Sir," Chen reported, her voice filled with disbelief, "the Zephyrian targeting systems appear to be malfunctioning. They're firing at where our fighters should be, not where they actually are." Kane leaned forward, studying the tactical display more closely. Elena had been right about one thing. The aliens were following predictable patterns. Their targeting computers were calculating intercept courses based on rational evasive maneuvers that the human pilots simply weren't making. They can't compensate for pure insanity, Kane realized. Their systems are designed to predict logical behavior. Elena's voice crackled over the communications channel. "All fighters maintain course. Do not deviate for any reason. Let them see what human stubbornness looks like." Rodriguez's fighter took a glancing hit from a plasma cannon that should have destroyed him instantly. Instead, the enhanced shields Elena had provided absorbed the blast and converted it into additional engine power, sending his ship rocketing forward even faster. "Holy hell," Rodriguez reported. "I just got hit by their main gun and I'm still here." "That's the beauty of human engineering," Elena replied, her A-10 weaving between alien weapon emplacements with impossible grace. "We don't build things to work perfectly. We build them to work when everything goes wrong." Kane watched in fascination as the human fighters began penetrating the Zephyrian formation. The aliens were responding exactly as Elena had predicted, falling back into defensive patterns that had worked against every other species they had encountered. But those patterns had never been tested against opponents who simply refused to follow any logical rules of engagement. "Sir," Williams called out, "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from the Zephyrian ships. Something's happening to their dimensional phase systems." On the tactical display, Kane could see the alien vessels beginning to shimmer and distort, The quantum flux that allowed them to exist partially outside normal space was becoming unstable, forcing them into full-dimensional synchronization. "The dimensional destabilizers are working," Elena announced triumphantly. "All fighters switch to assault pattern Omega. It's time to show them what happens when humans stop playing defense." What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. The human fighters, freed from the constraints of logical tactics, began attacking the Zephyrian ships with a ferocity that bordered on suicidal. They flew directly through weapon arrays, fired at point-blank range, and used their own damaged ships as improvised missiles when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Lieutenant Morrison's fighter lost its entire port wing to an energy beam but continued flying in a corkscrew pattern that somehow managed to confuse 3 different Zephyrian targeting systems. Sergeant Taylor's ship was reduced to little more than an engine and a pilot's seat, but she kept fighting until her craft finally disintegrated around her. "This is impossible," Chen whispered. "Our casualty rate should be 100% by now." Kane watched the battle with growing amazement. They were taking losses, certainly, but nowhere near the catastrophic destruction that should have resulted from a direct assault on such overwhelming force. "The Zephyrians are pulling back," Williams reported. "Several of their ships are actually retreating." Elena's laughter came over the communications channel, wild and joyous. "Do you see what's happening? They don't know how to fight us because we're not fighting like anyone else ever has." Her A-10 dove straight down the barrel of a Zephyrian capital ship's main weapon, firing continuously as she went. The alien vessel's shields flickered and failed as Elena's impossible weapons punched through defenses that had withstood attacks from entire fleets. "Captain Vasquez," Kane transmitted. "What's your status?" "Having the time of my life, Admiral," Elena replied, "and making a point that will resonate through the galaxy for the next 10,000 years. The largest Zephyrian ship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed everything else in the battle, began charging what appeared to be some kind of planet-killing weapon. Energy readings spiked beyond anything Kane's sensors had ever recorded. "All fighters, priority target," Elena ordered. "That ship is preparing to sterilize Earth's surface. We can't let that weapon fire." Kane watched as the remaining human fighters converged on the dreadnought, their ships looking like insects attacking a whale. The alien vessel's point defense system should have swatted them aside effortlessly. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Rodriguez, his fighter barely holding together, performed a maneuver that violated several laws of physics. He used his ship's gravitational field generator to create a temporary wormhole that deposited him directly inside the dreadnought's shield perimeter. "Rodriguez, get out of there," Kane shouted. "Negative, sir," the pilot replied calmly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." What Rodriguez did next would be studied by military historians for centuries. Using his ship's self-destruct sequence, he created a controlled implosion that destabilized the dreadnought's quantum core. The massive vessel didn't just explode. It folded in on itself, creating a miniature black hole that consumed 3 nearby Zephyrian ships before dissipating. "My God," Chen whispered. "He did it." The effect on the rest of the Zephyrian fleet was immediate and devastating. Faced with an enemy that treated impossible odds as merely another challenge to overcome, the aliens began a full retreat. Ship after ship activated emergency jump drives, fleeing into hyperspace with a haste that suggested panic. Elena's A-10 pursued the last few retreating vessels, her weapons lighting up the darkness as she harried them away from Earth's solar system. When the final alien ship disappeared into the void, an eerie silence settled over the battlefield. "All remaining fighters, return to base," Kane ordered. Mission accomplished. As the surviving human ships limped back toward Earth, Kane realized that something fundamental had changed. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged victorious not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat. "Sir," Chen said quietly, "according to these readings, only 7 of our fighters are returning." Kane nodded grimly. The price of victory had been terrible, but it had also been freely chosen. Every pilot who had died in the battle had known the odds and accepted them willingly. Elena's voice came over the communications channel one final time. "Admiral Kane, the immediate threat has been neutralized. But this is just the beginning. Word of what happened here today will spread throughout the galaxy, and every species will know that humans are not to be underestimated." Kane looked out at the star-filled darkness where his people had just written a new chapter in the history of the universe. They had taken an impossible mission and turned it into humanity's finest hour. "Captain Vasquez," Kane transmitted, "thank you for everything." Elena's reply carried the sound of someone who had finally completed a task that had been weighing on her for longer than anyone should have to bear. "Thank you, Admiral, for reminding me why humanity is worth saving." 3 days after the battle, Kane stood in the memorial hall that had been hastily constructed to honor the fallen pilots. 11 names were etched into the crystalline wall, each one representing a life given freely in humanity's darkest hour. The most prominent inscription read simply, "Lieutenant Carlos Rodriguez. He made the impossible possible." Elena had remained on the base during the aftermath, helping Kane's technical teams understand the modifications she had made to their systems. But Kane could tell she was preparing to leave. There was a restlessness about her that suggested someone who had completed a long and difficult journey. "The technology will fade in about 72 hours, Elena explained as they walked through the upgraded command center. "Your scientists will be able to study it, but they won't be able to replicate it until they develop the underlying principles on their own." Kane nodded. He had expected as much. Elena's gifts came with temporal limitations that prevented too much disruption to the natural timeline. "What about the Zephyrians?" Chen asked. "Will they come back?" Elena smiled, but there was something sad about the expression. "Not for a very long time. What happened here will be transmitted across their entire empire within days. They've never encountered a species that fights the way humans do. And it's going to take them centuries to develop new strategies." She paused at one of the observation windows that looked out over the Earth's surface. In the distance, cities were lighting up as night fell across the continent. Millions of people going about their lives, completely unaware of how close they had come to extinction. "In my timeline," Elena continued, "humanity survived the Zephyrian invasion but lost something essential in the process. We became too cautious, too strategic. We forgot that sometimes the only way to win is to embrace the impossible." Kane studied Elena's reflection in the window. There were questions he had wanted to ask but hadn't dared to voice. Now, sensing that his time with her was running out, he decided to take the risk. "Who are you really?" Kane asked. "And I don't mean your name or rank. I mean, who are you to have access to time travel technology and the authority to use it?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the stars visible through the reinforced glass. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much history unfold. "I'm the daughter of Lieutenant Rodriguez," she said simply. "The one who died 3 days ago in this timeline. In my original timeline, he survived the war but died broken and defeated, knowing that humanity had lost its soul in the process of saving its body." Kane felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The implications of what Elena was telling him were staggering. She had traveled back in time not just to save humanity, but to ensure that her father would die as a hero rather than live as a broken man. "He doesn't know," Elena continued. "Couldn't know. But in 3 days he accomplished something that will inspire generations of humans to come. He proved that we don't have to choose between survival and honor." Chen had been listening quietly, but now she stepped forward. "The temporal paradox. If you change the timeline, how do you still exist?" Elena's smile turned mysterious. "Time isn't as linear as most people think. Every choice creates new possibilities, new futures. I exist because I was necessary to create the timeline where my father becomes a legend. Once that's accomplished, I become a story told to children about the mysterious woman who helped save the world." Kane understood now why Elena had seemed so ancient despite her apparent youth. She was carrying the memories of a timeline that would now never happen, sacrificing her own history to give humanity a better future. "What happens to you now?" Kane asked. Elena gestured toward the hangar bay where her modified A-10 waited. "I return to my own time, or what's left of it. The timeline I came from is already fading away, being replaced by this new one where humanity remembers how to be properly, gloriously human." She handed Kane a small device that looked like crystallized starlight. "This contains complete records of the battle, including tactical analyses that will help you prepare for future threats. More importantly, it contains stories. Make sure they're told properly." Kane accepted the device with hands that trembled slightly. The weight of responsibility was enormous. These stories would shape how future generations of humans understood themselves and their place in the universe. "Will we see you again?" Chen asked. Elena shook her head. This timeline only needs one of me, and it already has her. Somewhere in the world, a little girl is being born who will grow up hearing stories about the battle where humans proved they could do the impossible. She'll become the Elena Vasquez this timeline needs. Kane watched as Elena made her final preparations to depart. Her A-10 was already powering up, the strange blue symbols along its wings glowing with increasing intensity. "Captain Vasquez," Kane called out as she prepared to board her aircraft. "Thank you for giving us back ourselves." Elena paused at the edge of her cockpit and looked back at Kane with eyes that held depths of time and possibility. "Thank you, Admiral, for proving that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible." She climbed into her cockpit, and Kane could see the aircraft beginning to phase in and out of normal space. Whatever technology powered Elena's time travel was preparing to activate. "All personnel clear the hangar bay," Kane ordered. "Temporal displacement in progress." As the last technician evacuated the area, Elena's voice came over the communication system one final time. "Admiral Kane, take care of this timeline. It's going to be something beautiful." The A-10 shimmered like a mirage, and then it was gone, leaving behind only empty space and the lingering scent of ozone. Kane stood in the sudden silence, holding the crystalline device that contained the most important stories in human history. "Sir," Chen said quietly, "what do we do now?" Kane looked out at the Earth turning slowly in the darkness, its cities glowing like stars scattered across the surface. Somewhere out there, people were being born who would grow up in a universe where humanity had proven that courage and determination could triumph over impossible odds. "Now," Kane said, "we make sure the story is told properly. We make sure every human child knows that when everything seems hopeless, when the odds are impossible and defeat seems certain, that's when humans are at their most dangerous." He activated his communication system, preparing to send the first official report of the battle to Earth's government. It would be followed by thousands of others, each one contributing to the legend that would inspire humanity for generations to come. "This is Admiral Harrison Kane, commanding officer of Terra Defense Station Alpha," Kane began. "I am pleased to report that the Zephyrian invasion has been repelled through the heroic actions of our pilots and the intervention of a remarkable ally." As Kane began to tell the story of how humanity had saved itself by refusing to accept the impossible, he could almost hear Elena's laughter echoing through time itself, carried on solar winds toward futures that now burned bright with hope and possibility. The mission had been unfeasible, just as the chief had said. But humans had a talent for making the unfeasible happen anyway, especially when everything they cared about was on the line, and that Kane realized was the most human thing of all.